Ever since its inception back in 1996, Pokemon has steamrolled the entire RPG industry, becoming the single most popular IP of all time and being your best bet if you had to point at a normal person and ask what kind of RPG they've played. Because, let's be honest, Fire Emblem just isn't as marketable as it should be. But there was a moment about a decade ago where Nintendo had released a competitor to Pokemon that answered every single criticism that Pokemon had ever received, and then just kind of dipped out of the US for the next decade. That game being Yokai Watch. And before I get into talking about both of these games, I do want to set a couple of ground rules. First of all, I've only played Yokai Watch 1, so please don't yell at me. I'll cry. And second of all, when it comes to the Pokemon side of things, I'm only really considering what the average person has experienced. Stuff like Battle Tower is kind of niche. That's a specific competitive headspace that you have to be in for that to be interesting, and so that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm mostly talking about what the average consumer would experience while playing each game. And with that being said, I do want to talk about these settings and plot first, because despite the fact how often these two games are compared, they are radically different in how they handle both of these things. So first, getting into Pokemon, usually the formula for Pokemon, because it really does follow a formula every time, is the main character is an unnamed child that gets kicked out of the parents' house because they've become of age. They select a Pokemon from a scientist. The scientist tells you to go catch all the Pokemon, and then you leave. And that's it. That's the entire thing. It's never really established any reason why you'd want to become the champion until like Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, I think, where both of them have situations where like the brother of the rival is the Pokemon champion, but the player themselves are just told to catch all the Pokemon. They're never actually explicitly told to fight the gyms or even fight the Elite Four or even become the champion. It just usually happens because Pokemon games, they have an excuse where a route is blocked off until the player does what the game wants them to do. And it's always awkward every single time. Sometimes it's funny, but it's never smooth, right? It's a lot of the times it's like, oh, the Snorlax is sleeping. Beat the third gym to get the Poke-Flute and then wake it up. Or, oh, a bunch of people have gathered around to watch a Pidgey fight. Beat the third gym in order to... They just disappear after that for no reason. But even though the player knows intuitively that they have to fight the gym in order to progress the game, the character doesn't know that. Silver doesn't know that. Red doesn't know that. He's just doing whatever he thinks that he wants to do in the moment. It's completely unrelated to him. He or she, whatever, the character has no reason to be doing what the character is doing. They just do it because that's what the player does. And that just progresses the story because the story isn't really a big point of contention for Pokemon. It's just kind of a backdrop for Pokemon to exist. Speaking of backdrop, the main antagonist of every Pokemon game is always just a backdrop, excluding Black and White with that weird lock-in moment with the hottest twink that Nintendo has ever produced. There is never a point in time in which a Pokemon antagonist feels like they have a reason for them to be doing whatever the fuck they're doing. Lysander's goal was to kill all the broke people. Ghetsis' goal was to kill all the people. And Team Magma and Team Aqua's goal was either of them just wanted more land or more sea, depending on which person it is, and neither of them have a reason for that. They just think it would be cool, I guess. But there's a little bit more depth added in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but I don't want to get into that. The main point is that the antagonists are just kind of tacked on backdrops for the box legendaries to exist. Now enter Yokai Watch, where Yokai Watch has a completely different way of handling the plot here. See, unlike Pokemon, Yokai Watch has named characters, including the main character, whose name is Nate, and he has a lot of personality. See, Nate is a different type of protagonist from the Pokemon games. While protagonists for Pokemon games are sort of empty husks that you project yourself onto, Nate is a hard-blooded character that's actually written out and has a personality that you follow through, and you are watching his story unfold as you play through the game. Now, when it comes to the plot, Nate also, similarly, doesn't have a motivation. Although, while Pokemon tries to gaslight you into thinking that you want to become Hokage, Nate doesn't really have a goal the entire game. Anytime that something happens where he has to step in and solve a conflict, it's always because the circumstances led him to that position. It's never really because Nate wants to be doing what he's doing. It's just the course of nature had led whatever is happening to happening, and Nate has to react to that. He's kind of a reactive protagonist in the same way that Denji is from Chainsaw Man. He's broke by circumstance. He's killed by circumstance. He's reborn by circumstance. And none of it is really his choice. And that's the same thing with Nate. Nate finds the yokai watch in a turn machine that he found in the middle of the forest. He only really entertained it because he thought it was weird in the first place. And because of that, after that point, all he really does is solve yokai that have been fucking around with his parents, or his friends, or his school, etc. Weird shit is going on, so Nate has to fix it. But it's not really because Nate wants to be fixing shit. It's just because shit is busted and he has to fix it, otherwise his life is going to be continued to be interrupted. Now, the settings are also radically different for both games. See, Pokemon usually lives in a very fantastical region system with different towns and different routes that all just kind of lead to the most upsetting topology I've ever seen. If you look at some of these maps, you will be fucking baffled at what these climates look like. I have to know what these globes look like because I swear it must be a fractal. Every single time there is an ice place, there's a desert place, there's a forest place, there's an ocean place. But that means that this world must be so fucked up because it's super cold here and super hot here, and those are incompatible ideas. But that's irrelevant. The main point here is that Pokemon's setting is disjointed. It's disconnected. None of them really have a followed through line except for Pokemon Sun and Moon, and like Pokemon Red and Blue, I guess. I don't really know about Scarlet and Violet or Sword and Shield. No, Sword and Shield has a disconnected one. I don't know about Scarlet and Violet. I haven't played Scarlet and Violet, but I'm assuming it's the same way. Yokai Watch, however, doesn't take place in the entire continent. It just takes place in one town. And I know that sounds really small, but considering the context, it really doesn't feel that way. The way that Yokai Watch's world is divided is not in different towns, it's divided in different districts, which each district of Springdale being the residential area, or the commercial area, or the entertainment area. All of those things are different districts that have different dungeons that play a role within the town's, city planning. There's a dungeon that is a hospital, there's a dungeon that is a school, there's a dungeon that's a museum. But there's never a dungeon that feels like it's a fantastical, weird thing that doesn't belong in the world. Until the very end where they go in the spirit world. But it's Yokai Watch, alright? Spirit shit happens. And that is only one dungeon at the very end, as opposed to every area in Pokemon where none of it feels like it belongs next to each other at all. But Yokai Watch has a very interesting way of dealing with the setting, despite the fact that it is just one town, that town is filled to the brim with buildings and shit to do. Every time you enter a building, there's a chance that there is NPCs you haven't seen before, yokai that are doing funny shit, because they're usually hilarious, and some sort of activity for you to do, whether that's a shop, whether that's a quest, whatever. Usually there is stuff to do whenever you enter a building in Yokai Watch. And while I do think that the plot and setting are radically different from each other, because of course they are, the gameplay is really where I think the differences shine the most. Because while yes, both of them are monster collecting games, that's only really the genre. And while they're both RPGs, they're not the same kind of RPG. See, because Pokemon is a turn-based game, and Yokai Watch is real-time, and Pokemon doesn't really take advantage of the dual-screen capabilities, Yokai Watch absolutely does, and when that's taken away from them, they're forced to adapt. But I'll get to that later. The main thing I want to talk about for now, though, is Pokemon, because the reason why Pokemon, I think, doesn't really adapt to the dual-screen well at all is because they didn't really have to think about different hardware up until the DS came out. And at that point, they'd already been running for 15, 16, 17 years, and so while they were running from Game Boy, Game Boy SP, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, all four of those consoles are pretty much the same fucking thing. And so when it finally came time to release something for the DS, they didn't really think about having to shift it all. And so even while every other industry was swapping to a 3D art style there, Pokemon didn't swap to 3D until Pokemon X and Y. And at that point, 2, maybe 3 generations, if you count Black, White, and 2 as their own thing, had already passed. And even then, they had not used the bottom screen for its capabilities at all until X and Y, in which it used it in side content like Pokemon and Me. But never was it used for combat other than just as a menu, which menus were used on the top screen just fine back in the Game Boy Advance. So there really was no reason for the bottom screen to have the menu other than just to have it look nicer, which I guess is nice. But that's not really the point. The point is that they did not utilize the bottom screen at all for its entirety of its existence, while Yokai Watch uses the bottom screen as its entire identity. The way that Yokai Watch's combat system works is it's a real-time RPG, which means that all of the yokai are attacking the enemies and your party at the same time. And instead of having it so you choose the options of what the yokai do, on the side there's a meter that fills up after the attacking that, you tap it and then you do your ult or whatever in the moment. It's a meter attack. The meters, they fill really fast, so there's rarely a moment where you're not using one, but the main gimmick here is not the meter. The main gimmick is the wheel, because you're not going one-on-one against these yokai and swapping them out per turn. Remember, this isn't a turn-based system. The way it works instead is that you have all of your yokai, well, you have 3 of them, on a wheel here, and you spin it in order to have it go to the right yokai that you need it to be in the moment. So say that you have a yokai that has high mana, or is high in meter, or is high in HP. Well, if you're against a very strong attack that's about to go because it's been choreographed by the text on screen, well, then you swap to your damage sponge. Or if your opponent is weak and you think you can get just that slight hit off in order to finish off that boss, then you swap to the yokai that you have that's full meter. And what this does is it makes it so much more involved for the player, because the player is really a part of the entire situation here. Everything is so high stakes and everything is so fast that you really have to be acting the entire time. It can get kind of tiring sometimes playing this game, and you are like fucking sweating your balls off because you're up against a boss that's kicking your ass. And so you have to spin the reel just right so that way you don't accidentally damage a yokai that you need to be awake right now, or you need to just get off enough HP so that way you can heal the rest of your yokai so that way they don't get completely TPK'd to the next route. And while we're talking about difficulty here, I do want to talk about that a little bit for both Pokemon and Yokai Watch. Now, if you started playing Yokai Watch, you're going to notice the difference in difficulty is stark, because Pokemon is baby easy rock, paper, scissors, and Yokai Watch will kick your ass if that's what you're expecting. But I think the biggest reason there is because Game Freak does not respect the intelligence of the player, because Game Freak expects the player to be a child. Game Freak doesn't really take into consideration the fact that the franchise is 30 years old, and so they'd feel no motivation in order to adapt that fact. They don't have a difficulty slider, they don't have any real boss fights until Sun and Moon, and even then it was really just an experiment that clearly didn't do well because they didn't do anything like that until Pokemon Legends, and even then they didn't really do anything interesting with it or particularly difficult. If you just know your type matchups, then getting TPK'd is incredibly difficult. Again, we're not talking about Battle Tower here. But the trainers, as long as you know what you're up against, if Serena has the Meowstic out, then you throw out a Dark type. Like, that's literally as simple as it gets. There's never a moment in Pokemon after, like, Pokemon Black and White 2 where you're sweating. And before that, if you know what you're doing, then you'll get through it eventually. I promise you. It's not as hard as you think right now. But Yokai Watch is very different. See, Yokai Watch is not made for children. Yokai Watch is made for a general audience. It's rated E10, and while Pokemon is also E10, Level 5 very clearly does not explicitly believe that Yokai Watch is just for kids. It has a darker tone when it comes to plot. A lot of the themes are darker. Not just darker, but also more mature, more adults. You know, there are a lot of themes about acceptance and a lot of themes about getting older. A lot of that stuff, which is poured in mostly for adults to enjoy and experience the game. But because of that, it also has more difficulty. It's more challenging for the player and more engaging. A lot of the fights are boss fights because, you know, Yokai Watch is a different genre. It's also a dungeon crawler. There are dungeons in it. All the dungeons kind of function as buildings. I talked about this earlier in the settings section. But when you're in the boss fight, when you're fighting against the bosses, a lot of them run as sort of puzzle boxes. There will be stuff like the pig sauna thing, where you have to decide which section you hit, because it allows you to, like, select what you're targeting in the moment. There'll be moments like the fisherman, where you have to decide which yokai you're attacking, because one is healing and one is DPS, and so if you have high HP, can you tank a DPS hit and attack the healer? If you have low HP, then you have to go for the DPS, otherwise the healer is going to, or otherwise the DPS is going to wipe your entire yokai watch. So a lot of those, situations, they're a lot more engaging for the player. They're a lot more challenging, they're a lot more fun, they're a lot more difficult. And because of that, yokai watch just kind of ages better. It just kind of feels better for the player. And I really think that anybody could play yokai watch right now and have a good time. In fact, I fucking dare you. Leave this video right now. Go play yokai watch. All this really just to say that I think that yokai watch is incredibly superior to Pokemon, and any allegations that yokai watch is a Pokemon clone is simply just ignorance. Tune out those people, alright? They don't have anything interesting or important to say. And that'll be all. So, have a good night. I hope you enjoyed the video, especially if you watched this far. It'd be really weird if you didn't and you watched this far, and, we are all judging you. But, it's because we're concerned, alright? Hate watching is not a healthy thing to do. Hate watching is very unhealthy, in fact. I do think that anything that grabs your attention really just kind of squeezes onto it. That's just taking advantage of you. And you should seek therapy.